I guess I don't need to introduce this person, but I will introduce this topic, which is, as Brian was sharing, for those people that were in this room earlier, Constitution 5.0 isn't just coming, it's here. We officially have a beta, or a version of Constitution that's ready to beta test. So, yay!
That happened the night before the forum. We shipped the beta. There was, I think, about 40 hours of work in the 3 days before the forum to finish everything I want to do for the beta. And
deadlines are good.
yeah,
Deadlines
I know.
are good. So what we're going to do in this hour that we have together is Brian's going to kind of be walking us through some of the major changes. I have some questions that I've prepared that I think will help dig deeper. Your questions will help us to dig deeper, so we're not going to do a presentation, then Q&A. We're just going to stretch out into the whole hour time with Brian's presentation, my kind of moderation with some questions, and the questions that surge up from you. So just raise your hand as they come up, okay? Awesome. All right,
cool.
Brian, your show.
Yeah, we have a beta. So I'm going to just share some of the things in it. There's no way I could share them all. There's no way. If you look at the difference between the beta version 5 and version 4.1, every single word in the Constitution just about is changed. It is a near complete rewrite. Right? Now, that's great news for people that are new to 5.0, and it's terrible news for all of you that actually know Holacracy today. Right? There are lots of changes. Some big, some small. I'm going to cover just some of the bigger ones and more significant small ones. But it's a completely different document than the one you're familiar with. So one of the major things that's different, it's easier to read, a lot easier to read. This was one of my main design goals for it, was to make it so that if somebody just picks up the Constitution and reads it to learn Holacracy, which is a terrible idea, but no matter how much I say that, people do it, right? I want them to actually have some chance of getting like some idea of the rules. They might not understand how to do the practice, but it would be nice if the rule book wasn't like, oh my God, I have no idea what this is saying. This makes no sense, right? So I wanted it to be much easier to read. And the result now is 20% less words in that Constitution, even with new rules added. 20% less words than version 4.1. And by the way, did anyone look at the version 5.0 alpha? There was an alpha version that we released. So the beta is a complete rewrite of the alpha. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Forget that. It was literally a complete rewrite. But most of that was for readability. So the rules are very similar to what you saw in the alpha. There are some simplifications and tweaks. But I literally went through the entire document and rewrote sentence by sentence to simplify the language. So 20% less words, and yet more sentences. Right? So I find that fascinating. 20% less words, but more sentences, which means much shorter sentences, right? There's almost double the number of paragraphs, right? Because it's just simple, short, little chunks broken up in a really easy to read manner. We've also lowered the reading level. There's online algorithms for assessing the reading level of things, right? It went from a college level, reading level, which I thought was honestly generous. Like, I questioned the algorithm, 4.1, college level seemed more like postdoc, right? But now it's down to a 10th grade reading level. So early high school reading level, right? I think that's awesome. And I dropped out of high school in 10th grade, so I can actually understand the document now. It's pretty cool. I know, right? Finally. Yeah. It's such an easier document to read, which I think is also not just important for the English version, but translating this thing is a pain, right? Now the translations are going to be both easier to do, but I hope more true to the spirit of it. It's hard to translate massively complex, grammar and structure and not lose meaning, right? Now it'll be easier to translate without losing meaning. So this is one of the things I'm most excited about. Like, you can actually read the damn document. It's really cool. Okay, there's also, as part of that, lots of clarifications. Dozens and dozens of things that are just clearer, that make more sense now, right? What can and can't be changed, for example. Some of this isn't just language clarity, it's rule clarity. Like in version 4.1, it wasn't clear what could you actually change with a policy of the Constitution's rules, or what couldn't you? And if you changed it with a policy, did it apply in subcircles or didn't it? And could a subcircle still change it if it did apply in subcircles or not? All of that is clear. There are defaults for all of that. Every section in the Constitution is now, if it can be changed via policy, it tells you that. It tells you what you can change, right? And if it doesn't, you can't. And there's a general clause about that. So super clear, including how it applies in subcircles, all that. It's just an example. There's lots of things like that, though. This is just one I'm picking out at random. There are lots of other rules that were vague and ambiguous in version 4.1 that are now clear. The definition of a policy, there was one of the biggest things that was really unclear in version 4.1. It was defined as a grant or constraint of authority, but that actually didn't cover all the ways that they're used. People would use them to change a default rule in the Constitution, for example, and that wasn't fitting that definition. Now policy is just clear. What is it? What's allowed? What's not? Right? That's clear. Other things I haven't listed here, right? When you can move a role into a subcircle or not, right? There's constraints on that are clear now. The golden rule, this is really important. The golden rule, if you don't know my metaphor, is the rule that says you can take any action you want or make any decision you want to get your role's purpose done unless there's a rule against it. And rules against it means domains, policies, or some other rule in the Constitution, right? That's now actually directly spelled out. That isn't in 4.1. To piece that together in version 4.1, you have to look at multiple sections and understand all sorts of convoluted logic to connect the dots. Right? So we taught it, but people couldn't read it easily. It was there, but you really had to work the logic. Now it's direct, right? The beginning of Article 2. Here's the authority you have. Here are the 3 constraints. Don't violate policies. Don't impact domains. And don't spend resources. So that's another part that wasn't clear at all in 4.1, how resourcing allocation works. Super direct and clear. Right? So things like that got cleared up. So I love that. It's just so direct. Ah, God, this excites me so much. So some other random things. Tactical meetings are not just for circles anymore. Anyone can convene a tactical meeting with any group of roles, even across circles, right? So for example, we had one in Holacracy 1 where we were looking at marketing Glassfrog, and when new features came out, there was a coordination needed between the marketing roles in one of our circles and the Glassfrog roles that were developing the features in another circle, right? But it wasn't all the roles in those circles. So we started having a tactical style meeting, which was by invite a few roles from this circle and a few roles from that circle, right? And that's just now constitutionally supported, right? You can say, oh, let's just schedule a tactical meeting, or just call one, anyone. Call a tactical meeting, right? And use the rules of tactical when you need it. Yeah. You do any project updates on whatever roles were invited to the meeting that you find relevant, right? It doesn't matter. You can pull together. Since projects are linked to roles, it's what projects are relevant in this meeting, right? So you can choose which ones to share or not. Yeah, here and then here. Go ahead. Oh, I'm happy to. Yeah, okay, great. By we, you mean you're going to take an action to do that? Is that okay, excellent, good. Look at that, Holacracy, like, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, it will. In fact, I'm really excited to announce the basic support for the critical structures of version 5 beta is already rolled out and live in Glassfrog. You can go in there and turn it on, and then suddenly your language there's some language changes will fit version 5. Some of the basic rules that you really need will be in there. Others are coming soon. By the time we finish the beta, our goal is to have all of the feature set of version 5 fully supported. So you'll see more things between now and the end of the beta period. Tactical meetings across circles is not in there yet, but that is one of the ones that's on the roadmap for coming soon. So yeah, if you want to experiment with version 5 beta, turn it on in Glassfrog, and you'll have at least all the basics you need to do it. So tactical meetings, not just for circles. Was there a hand up in the back? Okay, cool. Yeah, I love that. So not only that, tactical meetings are also, oh, did you have? Okay, cool. Reem, sorry. Process that, got it, go ahead.
Just following the question, when is the end of the beta version?
Oh, yeah, so the beta is not defined length. We're going to go until it feels like no feature or no bugs are coming in, and we've gotten enough feedback to feel confident about it. So I don't know whether that's going to be measured in just a couple of months or 6 months, right? Or longer. I don't know. I hope it'll be released formally sometime early next year. That's my best projection, but wide error range in that. It could be a bunch of you use it and find all sorts of problems with it. I'd be surprised. I think it's actually pretty solid, but we'll see. And if lots of people use it and say, we're not finding anything that's unclear or off, then it might happen a lot faster. So tactical meetings are also really nothing special now. I've been teaching that for a long time, but the reality is there were some things that were special, like metrics. If you wanted to get metrics from somebody, people didn't actually have a duty to share metrics except in a tactical meeting. Or project updates. They didn't have a duty to share project updates except in a tactical meeting. They still might, right? But there was things that are special. There's no longer. Now, anything that you can expect from someone in a tactical meeting, you can expect asynchronously outside of the meeting. So if you want project updates from someone, you don't have to wait to a meeting. It's one of their basic duties. You can go to them and say, hey, would you give me regular project updates on that? Or report on that metric. Metrics are also no longer assigned by the lead link. They're now requested the same way checklist items worked. It was weird in 4.1 how that was different. Checklist items had one logic, metrics another. They both use the request logic that checklist items used to. So what's really cool about this, I find it's fascinating. When companies are new to Holacracy, tactical meetings are awesome. They're like the thing people most love. With years of practice, tactical meetings are like almost go away. They go from the thing that people most love to not that relevant or useful. We do them sometimes. And that's because more things move to asynchronous updates and more real time, which now is more supported here. So you can get project updates whether or not somebody shows up in a tactical, right? So there's that. New resource allocation rules. I'm pretty excited about this one. So in version 4.1, it was pretty silent on resource allocation, except by giving it to the lead link, right? So the lead link had the accountability and the authority to break down resource allocation across the circle, which was one of the manager-like functions that was retained in lead link role. That's no longer the case. The lead link no longer has that authority. Instead, there is a new resource allocation system built right into the Constitution. Now, you can change it with a policy, so you can come up with something different if it doesn't work for you, but it is, I think, a better default. And it's one that's well tested because we've been using it for years now in Holacracy 1. It applies just as much to lead link as anyone else. Anyone can spend the circle's resources, right? So whatever resource pool the circle has available to it, anyone can spend those resources by announcing their intention to do so, right? Let me finish the explanation and then cue you up. So anyone can post publicly, announce. So we use Slack, so we'll do it over Slack. In this role, I intend to spend this much money for this purpose. And then you have to wait long enough for people to ask questions and share reactions. During that waiting period, anyone can escalate the spending for more consideration. And if somebody escalates it, then that stops your ability to proceed with the spending. And a lead link or the person who escalated it can unescalate can remove the escalation, right? So that's the lead link's authority. Interesting, they still have to use the process too. They can't just go spend the circle's resources. They have to post the intention as well. But that's the role that if there is a conflict, somebody escalates the spending and somebody needs to make an assessment on it, by default, it's the lead link that can review that and choose to let the escalation stand or remove the escalation. But you can change that as well via a policy, which we have in Holacracy 1. We have a role for that. We have a spending guardian role, and there's a way to do that. And there's 3 role fillers or whatever. You need 2 of them to remove an escalation. That's us. That's not Constitution. That's a policy. So you can add on to this, right? There's apps you can do like that, but the basics are different. And this supports different circles can have control of different resources. So you can use that process to transfer control of a resource pool or some subset of it from one circle to another or to a role. So this starts getting into something that supports something like what Zappos is doing, if anyone's been following them, with what they call market-based dynamics. every circle could actually be run like its own little business with its own bank account, right? Its own profit and loss like function. You don't have to do that, but it's now supported easily in the Constitution to the extent you want to go there. And you can kind of let it organically evolve, right? You can say, at first, it can be the anchor circle, has control of all the resources, and anyone who wants to spend them just posts that intention. I intend to spend this much money from our general company's pool. Or you can start breaking it down. You can say, well, you know what? Our circle should have its own pool. So we're going to take this much, into our own pool to spend. And then that circle can control it, and people can post spending intentions from that pool to break it down. Right? So I'm really excited about this, largely because I see how well it works in Holacracy 1. And it has a cultural impact as much as it is a practical one. It changes things. And it strips away one of the things that I see get in the way of Holacracy a lot, which is one of the fears is lead links are still controlling things because they control the resource allocation. Interestingly, I often don't see lead links actually doing that, but I still see the fear of them doing it get in the way of people like owning autonomously and pitching for the spending they want. So now everyone's in the same level playing field and gets to post their spending intentions. Questions? It's a big one. Yeah, go ahead.
Is version 5 specific on what resources are or what a resource is?
Yeah, that's actually more clear. One of the confusions that happened in 4.1 is people thought time was a resource, that people's time, and then lead links would try to control that. It is very clear now that that is not the case. Resources is money and other assets, and I don't think you can make any kind of reasonable argument that time counts as an asset. You can count it as a resource, but probably not a hard asset, right? Yeah.
That's explicit.
That's explicit. Well, it doesn't say time doesn't count, but it does. It is clearly defined as money and other assets, right? So yeah.
Wouldn't it create a lot of traffic of information if as far as I understand, I have to announce every resource being spent, so even the smaller amounts
Yeah.
to be, kind of stamps and whatever.
Yep. So there's you can always modify it with a policy. Right, so in Holacracy 1, we have a policy that says if it's under $20, you don't need to post at all. Don't worry about it. That part of the Constitution allows modifications. So in Holacracy 1, we've modified that so you don't have to bother posting small amounts. The other thing you can do just with built-in Constitution rules is stop posting every little thing and just get a control of a resource pool. I could post one spending intention, like I intend to spend $100 over the next, few months on miscellaneous little stuff in my role. And then I don't need to worry about posting every little one of them. I've got control of $100 or whatever it is, right? So it's really flexible. I can do the same thing and say, look, in my role, my role of spokesperson, I attend a lot of conferences. I did a general spending authorization, that's what we call it, to say I intend to spend many thousands of dollars, up to many, many thousands of dollars, to go to any conference that I judge is useful to go to spread Holacracy anytime over the next year, right? And that gave me control of whatever resources up to that limit that I wanted to spend. So now I don't need to post every intention. I've got in one blanket authorization for the spending. So I could also have chosen to do every single conference, right? It's flexible, and you can use whatever method makes sense to you. You look like you're not following, or yeah, go ahead.
Putting a policy in place which is modifying the Constitution feels awkward.
Yeah, it's not modifying the Constitution. It's the Constitution says you can further modify this process via a policy. So, and you'll see that mechanism all over the Constitution. There's sections that say you can modify this particular process with a policy. Yeah. Yeah.
If someone escalates it for more consideration, is there any type of process specified, the lead link involved, or what happens?
Lead link has the authority to review it and either remove the escalation or just let it stand, in which case it stays blocked, right? That's the only thing in the Constitution. That said, we have a great little app for that. Simple, we have a spending guardian role, and you need a majority of people filling that role to say, yes, I would make that spending decision as well, right? So that's not in the Constitution. That's an app that may or may not be right for everyone, but I like it a lot. Yeah, works for us well. Other hands? Tara, did you have anything you wanted on this too?
I guess I was thinking about companies that already have a budgeting process in place, in which case they need to do a little bit more work up front to to modify the policy right away.
Yep.
It's not like your automatic policies apply, it's got to be put into your governance.
Yes, you'll need to put it, if you have a totally different process, when you adopt 5.0 beta, you'll need to put in place a policy and you're brought a circle that says, instead of the process in the Constitution, we're going to use this. Although the way this is written, it could be in addition to, which I think is really powerful. Whatever process you have, fine, still do that as one way to get spending authorized. And try this. It's so powerful. And anyone go to the Beyond Budgeting talk, it's totally aligned with like one of the principles that he was talking about, right? With this idea of why not just let people use their judgment, but get transparency. You have to publish this when you're going to do it and wait to give people a chance to weigh in, and they can escalate it if they think it's a bad idea. So it is a peer-to-peer distributed process for keeping spending in check. And again, it may or may not work for every company, but I think as a default, it is a better default than LeadLink gets to control and break down the budgets that way. Now it's the circle controls it, and anyone in the circle can draw from that pool with a published spending intention. Also forces somebody to show up differently, and instead of saying, LeadLink, can I have permission to spend this? It's posting to the team, hey team, I intend to spend this. And if you get silence, you're authorized. Right? And I find that so powerful. That shift from deferring power to someone else, which is what I saw happening all the time when LeadLinks controlled it. People would defer their judgment. LeadLink, do you want me to spend this or not? I got that question often, even in my own company. Right? And I realized I don't want to be making those decisions. Right? Once I got a request and I thought it was a bad idea, and I asked, I said, do you really think that makes sense? And the person who asked me said, no, I don't think so, but I thought I should defer it to you. Right? Oh, right? No more of that. Now you decide if you think it's worth spending, and you state it publicly in front of your peers, I intend to spend this money. Yeah. If they think it's a bad idea, they'll comment or escalate it. Yeah, go ahead.
What happens when it's escalated?
Then it blocks the spending until somebody removes the escalation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No meeting or
Nope,
process.
nope,
Just-
but you can always define a policy to add one. Yeah. Yeah.
Will it stay visible, like seeing what is the resource that is spent in that circle?
So that really goes to the software support. And yes, our intention is add that into GlassFrog so you can actually track this more in GlassFrog. Yeah. And some companies will choose to use some accounting system for that instead, right? We still haven't figured out exactly how much we're going to support that in GlassFrog versus how much we're going to support the basics and let you use a complex accounting system if you're a big company that has that need. I don't know.
Maybe it's not creating tensions now.
Yeah.
Find a situation where the company changes.
Yeah. You want to see the authorizations, especially the ongoing ones, right? So we have a shared public spreadsheet right now where we track all the ongoing authorizations, right? And a policy that you have to track them there before you spend. So that's one way we do it. But ideally, that goes into GlassFrog with a Slack integration so that you can post it in Slack and it automatically gets posted into GlassFrog to your role. Cool. So that's that. I'm excited about that one. It's working really, really well for us. Here's another one. This is another big one. Multi-filled roles and circles had two different sets of rules in 4.1. Right? If you think about a multi-filled role, you could have like not everyone representing the role, but it was a totally different process if you had just one representative of the role. Different process to choose that than if you had a sub-circle with a rep link. Totally different structure, different expectations, different sections in the Constitution that talked about it. And a multi-filled role didn't have its own governance process. It was just a role. So if you wanted to make a policy that only applied to the different role fillers of that role, you would have to go to the broader circle's governance and bore everyone else with your policy because it only mattered in your role. If you had a sub-circle, you have your own governance. These are no longer two different concepts, right? So every role, the inside of every role is a circle, right? Think of that way. From outside, I see a role, zoom in, and from inside, oh, there's a circle in every role. And if the role is multi-filled, any one of those members can call a circle meeting for that role, a governance meeting, and propose a policy for that role, or propose sub-roles to break it down. It no longer takes an act of the governance of the broader circle to create a sub-circle. Any role can simply say, I'm a sub-circle now, call a governance meeting, I'm the only role filler, so just me shows up, and I can make any governance I want. I could even do that to organize my own work. I could take my own role and say, you know, this role's big. I'm going to break it down into 10 different roles. And I fill all of them. Until maybe there's one of them that somebody else should fill. Hey, Marco, do you want to fill this one role? And now we have a circle that didn't take any governance act of the broader circle, right? This was a significant theoretical misalignment in 4.1 or inconsistency, right? We tried to treat roles and circles the same, but there was this fundamental difference of them in 4.1. That's no longer the case. They are literally the same thing now. It's a matter of perspective. So from inside, you can just go do governance, which is really interesting. A multi-filled role can have policies, but no sub-roles. Or it can have one sub-role, right? Like maybe we fill a developer role and we have 6 people filling it. And for a while, we don't need to break it down. And then maybe we do, and we break it down with just one differentiated role. We still have 6 people filling that general developer role, and we realize we want somebody that's encouraging remote work-like practices for developers. So we create that differentiated role inside the developer role. And everyone else stays at the broader. So that means in 4.1, there was a bias to making everything explicit, even sometimes before there was tension. Right? Now it's easier. You can actually leave the ambiguity of the 6 of us fill the developer role, and it's undifferentiated until we need to differentiate one piece, and then another piece, and another. And finally, I'll get there, I promise. I got you queued. That also means lead link is now a multi-fillable construct. It had to be to make this work. Right? So lead link is no longer something that you only can have one of. Right? In the case of the developer roles, you have 6 people filling a developer role. Inside the developer role's inner circle, there are 6 lead links for that circle now. Right? Because all 6 of those role fillers, right? Sure. And they can break down their role if they want. And that's clear. And on top of that, what else was I going to say about that? Oh, we renamed lead link. It's no longer called lead link. Yeah, it's now circle lead. Right? The contrast to that is when you're assigned to a role, you are the role lead. So that term is used all over the Constitution. So when you fill a role, you're the role lead. When your role happens to have an inside the circle in your role, you're the circle lead. So they go together. If you're the role lead from the outside perspective, you are the circle lead from the inside perspective. Right? So still lead link, basic functions are there except for the ones we removed, like resource allocation, but it's now called circle lead. Okay, questions? You got it. Okay, cool. Go ahead.
If I understand properly, there could be more circles more dynamically than before, and more tactical meetings more dynamically than before.
Yeah.
That means more facilitators.
Not necessarily. Again, when you fill a role with some other people, if anyone needs a facilitator, call a governance meeting and call an election. You don't need to. You could have a multi-filled role that never calls a governance meeting because it doesn't need one until you do need one. And then, when you need one, you don't even have to elect a facilitator. No one has to add that item to the agenda, right? You could say there's default rules if you don't have an elected facilitator. You know, there's default rules of who gets to facilitate. So you could just use that. If you're only going to do one governance meeting because you need one policy in your multi-filled role, why bother electing someone? Just use the default rules, have a facilitator, get your one policy. When it starts looking like we're going to do regular governance, now maybe elect a facilitator.
Okay, it's quite flexible about it. It doesn't control.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, Tara.
I guess the situation that's in my mind, and maybe you can help me clarify it, is if I have a tension with another one of my 5 developer role fillers, I'll bring it to our internal role governance meeting, and the result would be that there would be maybe roles created within our circle.
Yep.
But what if a more optimal solution would be roles created at the level...
In the broader circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one possibility is the creation of some, extra bureaucracy possibly by these rules that
Yep.
get created within instead of outside of.
That is absolutely possible.
Yeah.
Just like in version 4.1, there are better and worse ways to solve a tension, and some of them are messy. Like sometimes I'll see people going to broader circles and proposing policies there when there was a perfectly good solution locally that would have been less bureaucratic, right? So it is absolutely possible to misuse or poorly use holacracy, and that's possible with this too. You could propose governance inside your thing and create roles that need to interface with so many roles outside the circle that they should probably be better to be outside, right? So In that way, I'd say it's pretty comparable. This might give another potential pathway to misuse, right? That's absolutely possible. And it gives you a pathway to solve bureaucracy, because there's things that I don't want to bring to the broader circle. So this gives you flexibility. You absolutely can misuse it, right? And my hope is in the rollout itself of Holacracy, what I see the bias being in most companies is they think the circle structure is very rigid and fixed. And I cannot imagine most people going and calling their own governance meeting in their multi-field role until that either they're good at Holacracy, right, or that feels more sanctioned somehow. So I don't know. We'll see, though. I'm not sure. There's definitely more rope that you could hang yourself with, right, in addition to doing really cool things with. Yeah. And you can still propose changing it. Someone in the broader circle can move that role out if it belongs in the broader circle or whatever. Let's see. I'm going to go up this way. Go ahead, Porch.
So let's say you have a multi-field role, it's like a subcircle, and then you differentiate a role. Now there's the accountability that the lead link previously had, which was role assignment.
Yeah.
But now you have 5 lead links. So who gets to assign that role?
Yeah, role assignments are a domain now, and they follow the same rules as a domain. Another simplification. It's no longer some special rule set. It's just a domain. So a multi-field role with a domain means anyone who fills that role can make decisions to impact that domain. So if there are 5 lead links, they all have a domain, same as any multi-field role with a domain. Anyone filling the role can impact the domain with their decisions. So one lead link can put you in a role, another one the next day could take you out of it. If that triggers tension, guess what? There's a governance meeting you can go to and solve it. Right? Maybe you want to create a role filler role and delegate the domain to just that role. Right? Or maybe you want a policy that says no lead link can make a role assignment change unless at least 2 others agree. I don't know. Right? Again, is that going to be an issue? I don't know. Sometimes not. Maybe it is. Solve it if it is. Yeah. All right, there's a hand. Yeah.
So just to get that clear, if I'm a role fitter in a multi-field role, and we decide together in our little governance meeting that we create sub-roles and we become a circle,
Yep.
then automatically there's a lead link, rep link, which sit in the broader circle.
The lead link is just whoever was assigned to fill the role in the broader circle, right? Just like today and 4.1. And yes, then we get to add a rep link. I thought I'd add some music to keep this a little festive, right? Yeah. It's then a rep link can be added. There is more flexibility in 5.0 to change whether rep links are there. So actually a couple of differences. That's really funny. In version 5, you can actually uninvite rep links from showing up in the broader circle. You have to give another comparable pathway to get tensions there, but it doesn't have to be rep link. That's just the default. This is important because we had some cases where there was like a company, one place we worked with in Dubai, they had, I think 20 subcircles of their general circle, and that seemed to be the best structure. I mean, it really did seem to be the best one. But 20 rep links showing up in the meetings was a nightmare, but 4.1 you had no option. In 5.0, you can adopt a policy in the broader circle that says, instead of 20 different rep links, there are these 3 people you can elect as your rep link or whatever, or here's a role that is your representative role, use them, as long as it's comparable representation. Right? And somebody can challenge that and a secretary can interpret it. Is that comparable representation? If not, secretary strikes it, just like now. So at least you can change it. Also, rep links aren't invited to tactical meetings automatically anymore, which we found was pretty much useless and theoretically useless, because anything you can do in a tactical meeting, you can do outside of it. You don't need a rep link ever having to go to a tactical. They can make any requests they need to in the broader circle directly. So that also simplified some things there. This change, by the way, this is probably one of the, I'm sorry, like anyone who knows 4.1, this is going to bend your mind. For anyone brand new to Holacracy, I think it's actually simpler. I think if you read it, it shortened things, it's cohesive. I think learning it new this way will be actually pretty straightforward. I think that's a hypothesis. But man, it's still twisting my head because I'm so used to a different mode, right? So I think this is going to be an interesting unlearning process for those of us who know the rules well in 4.1. Okay, I saw a hand here and then back there. You got it? Cool. Tim. Yeah, if you have to go to our GitHub repo, which if you go to holacracy.org/constitution, there's a link there to the development version, right? And then from there, go to the label beta. You should see a label in there, beta. It's also in the Wova app if you want to see it in there. Yeah, cool. One more.
How many lead link at the anchor circle?
Anchor circle. This is another change. So in 4.1, the anchor circle was a special case. It can have no lead links, and then there's these rules, or it can have many, cross links or whatever. Cross links are gone. There's no longer such a thing. There is a way to link roles, but there's not a separate structure called cross link. Vastly simplified that. The anchor circle has the option. You can have multiple lead links in the anchor circle. That would be similar to what you would do with cross links in 4.1. They're circle leads, right? Multiple circle leads in the anchor circle, or you can leave it with none. And there's ways to have other circles with none as well, so it's no longer a special case, which I really love this. One less special case, one more just generic system. Go into that. Any role can create or join cross-cutting circles. Sometimes these circles won't have or need lead links, circle leads. So the way this works, here, let me give an example. It's easiest to understand with an example. And again, you don't have to use these rules. It might be for the first years of holacracy practice, no one uses this because no one understands it well enough to do it. But there are cases where the rules are really useful. So for example, we hire software developers for our GlassFrog team. That interview process is complex. It usually involves a partner prospector role, which is in one circle. But we invite them to an in-person retreat. And there's another role that coordinates retreat scheduling and lodging in a totally different circle. And it matters that we want the person to be staying with people, not in a hotel somewhere else. So we have to coordinate lodging with where that person's going to stay when they're there for an interview for a few days. And then we have a developer role in yet another circle that needs to actually code with the person to assess. So we have 3 different roles in 3 different circles at least involved in this. And it's a complex process. Now, in 5.0, any one of those roles could get with the other 2 and say, hey, let's group together in a circle to govern our shared process for interviewing technical candidates. And the roles get to consent to that. It is an agreement among the roles. The roles get to say, would it serve my purpose to agree to join this circle? If so, the 3 of them come together, they come to an agreement on the purpose of the circle, and then they link into it. So there is a way to link roles into circles. You now have a circle that is cross-cutting across the holarchy, across 3 other circles, with 3 different roles from 3 different circles linked in, and that circle can now add governance on any of those 3 roles. It can add accountabilities for dealing with that shared process for the shared purpose that the 3 roles agreed on. It can create policies that limit those 3 roles. So a role can now have governance added onto it by more than one circle, right? Which is interesting. And if the role ever decides, it doesn't serve my purpose anymore to be part of your little thing. I don't like what's happening here. This is not helping my purpose. They can just quit and unlink, and all the governance added is immediately wiped out, right? So think of it as a metaphor like you voluntarily joining some other organization. You're saying, sure, I'll join this until I don't want to be part of it anymore, and then I'll quit, right? Or it's also a way to get joint ventures, right? Like imagine a joint venture between 3 different parts of a larger organization, or 4 or 5, can now come together and form a circle to govern and express that joint venture. And that circle can behave just like an anchor circle with no lead links, right? So it's no longer this special thing that only the broader anchor circle can do, right? You can form this new cross-cutting circle for a joint venture with no lead links because it's there. That circle could even be across organization. It's much easier in version 5 to actually have initiatives that link different organizations together in that kind of circle. And it's clear what authority it will have to even govern roles in other companies. That's cool. I don't have any idea how that's going to be used and by who, but I think it opens up interesting possibilities that were not practical in 4.1. You can literally have one company adding governance on a role in another company in a way that is safe and that works. Think about that one for a while and tell me what you figure out. That's cool. I think that's cool. Okay, question, yeah.
Is there a way to ensure the alignment of the purpose of these cross circles with the overall organization?
Yeah, so to create the circle, it has to have agreement of the roles that are forming it, and it has to serve their purpose, right? So every role that's joining it has to serve that role's, every one of the roles' purposes, right? So that keeps it aligned. It's not this rogue thing. And if those roles, for any reason, if all the roles that are linked in unlink from it, the circle's immediately destroyed, right? So it's an interesting, setup. Michael. Yeah.
Could you speak to how governance happens in that particular case where there's no secretary facilitator? How does that get started?
Yeah, same way it does in any subcircle. You use the surrogate rules, which say, if you don't have an elected facilitator, the secretary can choose it. If you don't have an elected secretary either, then I think the next default, oh God, I'd have to look it up. I'm actually gonna have to look up rules. It's either the circle lead, and if you don't have one, or I might have removed that, I don't remember, then it's the first circle member to say, I'm facilitator, until you elect one. Yeah.
If I can follow up more specifically, on imagining how this would happen, like literally, for example, these roles come together in a circle.
Yep.
There isn't a secretary facilitator who will create.
No, there's not. Not until they call for the election. Yeah. And there is no rep link in that case. If you have no broader circle, which you don't, like it's the same as an anchor circle, there is no broader circle. It's a joint venture formed from multiple parties, just like a company you can think of as a joint venture formed from the stakeholders of it, right? It follows the same paradigm. God, I love the theoretical beauty of this. I hope somebody is appreciating that too. Is anyone appreciating that too? Just somebody? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Feels good to hear. Appreciate that. Yes, and then I want to take these two hands. Yeah. Yeah, we're working on it. Oh, yeah. We're doing a three-dimensional thing. We're working on it. One thing you're probably getting is this is a massive change for the software tools. We've been working on it for months. We've got a lot going into this. I'm flying right from here on Friday to go to a deep dive working retreat with our Glassfrog team to start like the next wave of features. We've already shipped the first wave and spec it all out and design it all. So yeah, I hope you'll help us test it and give us feedback and figure it out. But yeah, Glassfrog is your friend if you want to adopt 5. Yeah.
Yeah, this sounds very exciting, but how do you think this will work in like companies using Holacracy but not on that C level of maturity? They're still like, how do you think it will work? And, because you
Yeah.
have to have some kind of
I think it tensions the system more, right? Like think of the resourcing change, even that one. What this is doing, version 5, even more than 4.1, if you are trying to apply the old paradigm in this rule set, it's gonna create even more tension, right? Now you can literally, people can just go create their own subcircles. Feel that from a conventional manager, suddenly your people can just go do their own damn thing in a major way in their role, including getting other people in to fill roles in their thing, right? Or they can start forming cross-cutting circles and governance that you don't even get invited to, which forces you to do what you should be doing anyway if you want to be in this paradigm, figuring out, I need to leave that role free to self-organize. What do I need to expect from it? And what constraints do I need to honor for my broader purpose I'm serving, which is what we want anyway. So I think it pushes even more there and tensions the system. Yeah, back there, yeah.
Is this also a solution for example, for large projects, which
Yes.
involve multiple roles?
Yes, it is.
Because that's
Yep.
missing a bit now.
Absolutely.
Give temporary structure
Yep.
for larger projects.
I think you're right.
And if you do that, all the roles can update their projects in their own
Mhm.
service.
Yep.
But you have
Yeah. Yep. Another interesting way to do it. Yeah, Michael.
Could you speak to the implications of this kind of circle in the taxonomy of policy and domains and where it stands to apply?
Yeah, these circles cannot have domains given from the outside, right? Right now, and this is an actual open question for me. I wonder if a role forming one should be able to actually delegate some of its control as a domain or not. I don't know. Right now in 5.0 beta, you can't, and that's one of the things I want to know if that is breaking something, right? Should you be able to? So one area to get feedback in. Right now you can't, so they can't have domains from the outside, but within the circle, you can still break down and control things. Which, by the way, policies now don't have to be tagged to a domain. There's better rules for that, so that is one of many confusions that's removed. People got confused by that all the time in the training, in the early learning. Okay, I want to move on for time and add the next one. Working agreements. I'm excited about this too. So I don't think you can have an effective holacracy practice without doing this, and it was possible to do it in 4.1, but it wasn't in any way made easy by the Constitution. You could even bring an argument that it was unconstitutional in 4.1, depending on how you interpret certain things. But you need something more than accountabilities to capture expectations, when the expectations are between people or between the company and a partner, not a role. So for example, you run a retail store. You want the person to show up for the opening at 9 a.m., right? There is no structure in Holacracy 4.1 that makes that easy. What do? Accountability doesn't work. That's what some people try to do, but it's a mess and it breaks the accountability system. Because all an accountability says is when you are energizing the role, then you need to break it down into projects and actions and prioritize them. But you don't want that when somebody's already energizing the role. Right? You want them to agree to start energizing the role as of 9 a.m. in this physical location. There is no structure that allows that, right, in 4.1, except there's a clause that says any other contractual relationships you have between the company are still valid expectations. So you had to have this separate thing like a working contract or an employment agreement or something with a person. And then that was so unclear you could put anything in those, and some of the stuff in those would get fight holacracy and get super conventional. It's just messy. In 4.1, there's a new construct. It's called a working agreement. A working agreement is an agreement either between two partners or more partners, or between a role representing the company, the organization, and a partner. So then a role that cared when you get to work could request a working agreement. Will you please be at the store by 9 a.m.? Right? And unlike an accountability, that doesn't go through a governance process. That's another weird thing about proposing that as an accountability. How the hell do objections work, right? Like, it's governing you personally. So but you can't object from you personally, right? Like, that's a mess. But if somebody's wanting you personally to commit to something, it's not enough to propose it in governance. They need to ask you personally for your commitment, and it needs to be okay to say no. And it needs to be okay for the company to fire you if you say no, right? Both of those need to be okay. So working agreements is a new construct. It's not in a meeting. You can go to anyone and say, hey, I'd like to request you agree to this working agreement. And there's a definition of that and bounds. I can't ask you to do something that I really should use an accountability for. I can't say, while you're in this role, will you agree to this activity, to do this? That is not valid. Nor can I ask you to, another misuse of these, to commit to an outcome. That would undermine the system. I can't say, somebody actually requested this once, and I saw this happen. Somebody once said, can you just agree that you won't trigger me? Good luck, right? And unfortunately, the person asked was smart enough to say, no. But sometimes people ask for things like that. You're agreeing to something that's making someone else responsible for you, or putting yourself in a position where you have to try to control something that you can't necessarily control all the variables of. So working agreements need to be behavioral, right? When this happens, yes, I'll do this. Or while I'm working, I will, right, do this other thing, or whatever. I don't know. Something that isn't about the role, but about how you show up. Or when you are triggered, I will agree to sit down and make space to process that with you. Right? That would be a valid working agreement, you know? Or when I ask you to take an action in a role, if you're not already working, I'll check in. I had this with Lex. We had a personal agreement that we wouldn't ask each other for like role-based stuff while in the shower. I was, personal relationship, right? So when we work together, so you know, you can do things like that with working agreements. Whatever you need that's partner to partner or role to partner. And then you can count on them, and there's rules for them. And it still takes, in this case, a consent threshold. This is interesting because it always drives me nuts when usually the sociocracy community talks about how holacracy uses consent, and it doesn't. It does not use that process. Governance meetings do not use the same threshold at all as sociocracy. So I would always push back and say, holacracy does not use consent. Please stop saying that. But now it actually will, but in a totally different context. Not in a governance meeting. When I am asking you for your personal agreement, I need your consent. Not to imply a whole process of it. I can just ask you, will you consent to that? If yes, we capture it, and it becomes an expectation, and I can later change it or break it unless I agree otherwise. I mean, not break it as in violate it, but I can say, hey, I need to undo this agreement, right, unless I've agreed otherwise. And we can have agreements otherwise if we need them. Yeah, okay, let me take some questions. I'm excited about this stuff. Yeah, Forge.
So when I think of the protocols and authentic relating
Yeah.
for like the request step and nonviolent communication,
Yep.
oftentimes those are really great protocols for creating person-to-person agreements.
Yep.
And now this is like a place where those can all, I guess, connect to, or
Yep.
wherever it is that the organization tracks working agreements,
Yep.
the outputs of any of these interpersonal processes, if the output is a relational agreement,
Yes.
can be called one of these working agreements.
Absolutely. I think of this like an API. It doesn't tell you what specific apps you should have in your interpersonal space. Do you want to have a conflict resolution process? Do you want to have an agreement around how you're going to deal with charge or clear the air or whatever? It doesn't tell you how to do those things, but it gives you a place to hook them in and some basic rules around it to anchor in the expectation structure. Because in 4.1, there's a clause that says, hey, if it's not in this Constitution, you have no right to expect it from anyone. If it's not one of the things the Constitution contains. So you could easily say, you have no right to expect anything I agree to you with, for good reason in 4.1. But now there's another place, so you can connect into it. Now, you could have a working agreement that says, hey, will you agree that whenever you're angry with me, you'll just scream at me at the top of your lungs, you know? Like, you could agree to that, or you could agree to something different. It's not trying to tell you. It's content neutral. It's not trying to tell you what you should have. It's just giving you the structure to plug into.
You mentioned employment agreements. Are those now technically a part of the working agreements as well?
Yes, so that's now actually connected in. Partnership is defined more clearly, right? And when you agree to become a partner, to serve in this capacity in the organization, whatever employment contract, whatever agreements you have as part of that, that's basically either one giant working agreement, or you could break it up if you want, but it's a working agreement. And that becomes part of what's called the relationship contract. So there's an interesting clause. If I just ask you for a working agreement, you can later say, I'm going to undo that agreement unless you agree otherwise. But when it's part of joining the partnership, then you, by default, you can't change it without the other party's consent. So in other words, when you joined my company, you said, I'll travel for retreats. Right? You can't just undo that. You've committed to saying that's part of our relationship contract, which means you need Holacracy 1's consent to change that, right? But you can always quit. You can always end the relationship, but if you're staying in it, if it's part of that relationship contract, you need consent, and you can agree to make some other agreement part of that contract. You can say, this new agreement is so important, I want you to agree to make it part of the fundamental relationship contract that we can count on and that you will not change without the other party's consent. So there's rules for all of that. I know I'm going quickly, and you can read it in the Constitution if you want to dive in deeper. But let me take, do we have time for?
We've got about 4 minutes.
Okay, let's take a couple more. Yeah.
How are they captured? Can you specify that?
They have to be captured in writing and not specified in the Constitution. Glassfrog will have support for tracking them. So you can then see, and you can see who's actually agreed to what, because you sometimes have cases where different people have agreed to different things. Like if somebody asked me, would I agree to always make space for someone else to process their trigger with me? I won't agree to that, right? I trigger too many people and it would take up all my time. So, you know, I'm going to say no to that, but I would say yes to some other agreement. Other people might be fine with that and say yes to that agreement, right? So you can have different agreements in different ways, which also lets your partner agreements not be top-down controlled predictively with one giant, here's the sum total of all agreements you need to join this company. We can have a minimum set, like we need people to agree to travel to retreats or whatever, right? Minimum set of agreements, and then we can see what agreements naturally take off by allowing it to emerge, right? We had a case once in Holacracy 1, one agreement that one person had was that he wouldn't drink more than 2 drinks during our retreats. And it was just with him, right? Because he drank too much once, right? Like, and so there was one agreement with just him, but we have a registry and he tracked it. And for whatever reason, like lots of other people just started signing up for the agreement. Like, before I knew it, like 80% of the company had agreed to that. No one asked them to, and nobody really cared, but they had. I don't know. So we had an agreement emerge. And then, ironically, then the original guy was like, I don't really have an issue with this anymore. I'm going to unagree to it. So he doesn't have the agreement anymore, but half the company does. So anyway, there's it allows the agreements to be more self-organizing and emergent instead of just top-down imposed. Okay, back there, yeah.
Is there a way to connect working agreements to a certain circle, so to people energizing roles in the circle?
Absolutely, yeah. If you have the retail store circle, you could have a policy. Nobody may fill any of the roles in this circle unless they agree to these working agreements. And that would restrict lead links' ability to assign people, circle leads' ability to assign people to the role, right? So it's, again, you can do so many things with it. It's a tool in your toolbox, but it opens up so much, and you need it. You cannot do Holacracy, even in 4.1, without something like this. That's what I've learned and realized. You absolutely need it, or Holacracy is fundamentally crippled. So now it's built in, and it's much easier to do, and you don't have to go figure out what you need. It's right there. Okay, in closing, the beta would love anyone who is up for experimenting with basic GlassFrog support, but we're going to be rolling out more, so you're kind of in Wild West territory. If you want to experiment with us, I don't know if that metaphor translates to Europe, but if you want to experiment with us, please adopt the beta. Please give your feedback. You can post it right on GitHub. If you don't want to deal with that, just send it to me, and I'll get it to the right place. Any feedback around this is helpful. I will not answer all of the questions you might send me because I can only answer so many and I'm expecting a lot, but I would love to hear them anyway because it helps me understand what people are needing to understand. We'll also work on, before the final release, online tool, basically a training of some sort to help people learn these rules in more depth. So that's where we are. Out of time. Thanks all. Appreciate it. Enjoy.